We're still in Mark. We're going to be in the Gospel of Mark through the whole Lenten season, but we've been in Mark for weeks now, and we're still in chapter 1. That tells you how much is packed into chapter 1 of Mark. And today we are beginning with verse 29. As soon as they, Jesus and some of the disciples, left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about it at once. Jesus came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening at sunset, they brought to Jesus all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door, and he cured many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons, and he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, Jesus got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted him down, and when they found him, they said to Jesus, "Everybody's searching for you." And Jesus answered, "Let us go on to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also, for that is what I came out to do." And he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in the synagogues and casting out demons. Friends, where do you go to get away from it all? Where do you go? For some of you, I imagine it's a place. You have a place that you go, a physical location to block out the world, to forget about your troubles for a while, to just focus on yourself. Does anybody have a place like that? Yeah? Or for some of you, I know it's an activity. It's something you do that helps you really focus on that thing, and so you can kind of just pretend the rest of it's not there, or get some time thinking. I know for some of you it's crocheting or knitting, right? That's your place to go. And for some of you it's creating art or playing music. For some of you maybe it's a walk in the woods, or I imagine for some of you maybe it's not any of that, it's a person. A person is your place to get away from it all. It's a friend you know that when life's getting you down and you have too much stress in your life, you can call them on the phone, and for some reason when you talk to that person, it just all goes away for a while, and you can just be with them and they're just with you, and somehow they help you center yourself in a new way. I was thinking this week about what my place away is right now, and for me, my place to get away from it all is in a coffee shop full of people. Which seems kind of odd, doesn't it? I mean, how are you getting away from it all if you're in a coffee shop full of people? But for me right now, that's the place I go. There's something about the energy in a coffee shop and all the people around, and they're having conversations and doing things and ordering things, and I wonder about them and why they're there and what they're talking about. And some reason that gives me energy when I'm writing, or it helps me be creative. Now, I'm not interacting with any of these people. I have my earbuds in. I'm sitting behind my laptop all the time, pretending to work even if I'm not, because I don't want to interact with people. Strange thing is, more than once, somebody, this is absolutely true, somebody has walked up to me and tapped me on the shoulder, and I pull out the earphones. "Are you a pastor?" I have no idea how they figured it. I don't have a Bible sitting there. I'm not wearing my stole and a robe. I don't know if we give off an aura or there's a smell about pastors. Yes? Oh, most people are at work, so if you're sitting there... That's called a zing, what he just said to me there. Yeah. Well, anyway, the Gospel of Mark. There's a lot we could talk about in just this little piece that I read you today. There's a lot in here, and it probably raises some questions I'm not going to have time to get to today. So really, just in the few minutes that I have with you, I want to focus on one little piece of what I read, and that's that phrase where it says Jesus goes off to a deserted place. He gets away from it all, off in a deserted place. What do you imagine when you think of that phrase, deserted place? If you've got your smartphone on you right now and you have a way to search on the internet, or Google or something, get that out right now and type in the phrase deserted place and do an image search and see what pops up. What pops up if you type into an image search deserted place? I was kind of surprised this week. I tried this, and All kinds of pictures are there. There are pictures of really verdant, beautiful green areas. And there are pictures, my search came up with a lot of old buildings and architecture that's not in use anymore, and some of it covered with vines and really beautiful. And some of the pictures were of these really kind of isolated, foreboding places, all these ideas of what a deserted place might be. Are you finding anything interesting there? Yeah. So think what you picture when you think deserted place. Now, Mark doesn't tell us what he means when he says Jesus goes to a deserted place. It might be like the wilderness that Jesus goes to at the beginning of Mark. Remember, he goes for 40 days to go off and be by himself. So we're left to kind of imagine what it is. But for some reason, in this part of Mark, Jesus needs to get away from it all. He needs to go off by himself into this deserted place. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, this really opens up kind of a human portrayal of Jesus here. It seems like we might wonder, is Jesus tired? Does he need to get away from it all for a while? Is he grumpy and feeling like, I can't be around people right now? Is he just sucked out of all of his energy and like a good introvert, he needs to be away from people so that he can be ready to serve them again? It is a really deeply human portrayal of Jesus, that he needs sometimes to get away from it all. And he doesn't just go to lounge around and do nothing. It says he goes to pray. He goes to be more deeply in God's presence, to kind of listen to what God's trying to say to him and figure out what's next for him. Because he's really been very busy already up to this point in the gospel. If you were with us last week, we told the story about how he went to the synagogue and there was a man there who had an unclean spirit. He was possessed, and Jesus heals him of it, and he confronts then the powers that be, the social structure that said, well, he's really not appropriately supposed to be healing people, not on the Sabbath, not in the synagogue. He doesn't have the right credentials to be the guy teaching there, all these things. And now Jesus has left the synagogue with these 4 disciples. They've gone to Simon's house, presumably to get away from it all for a while, to go into a private home where they can rest. And so these young guys, and we kind of forget this, these are all young guys. They're just young adults going off to the mother-in-law's house to hang out for a while and rest. But Jesus doesn't get any rest, does he? Because when they get there, they find out that Simon's mother-in-law is sick. She has a fever. And Jesus has to decide, well, I came here to rest. Do I go rest, or do I address this need that's right in front of me? Can I ignore this? How many of you guys have had the flu already this season? Yeah. I got the flu the day after Christmas. I was sick the whole week of Christmas. I just stayed in bed the whole time. You just let it run its course. I didn't go see a doctor or anything. And I imagine some of you that had the flu did the same thing. And you're probably like me now wondering, was that the smartest thing to do? Given this season that people have died, more people than normally have died from the flu. But we don't normally think about things like flu or having a fever to be something that you necessarily would rush to the hospital for. We don't think about it being something you could actually die of if you're a normally healthy person. But of course, in the ancient world, that was exactly the case, right? In the ancient world, to have a fever meant it was very possible that you would not survive it. And so Jesus can't ignore this need. Even though he needs rest, he can't ignore that there's a need right in front of him that he has to respond to. And so unlike the way he healed the man with the unclean spirit in the synagogue, when he speaks to the man and to the demon, here he simply reaches out his hand to the woman. And it says that he lifts her up. She rises, and she's healed. And then she goes off to serve them, it says. Now, I know some of you get hung up on this part of the story. She was sick. She just got over it. She has to make dinner for these guys? Come on. But it's important to note that the word serve here in Greek is the word diakonia. It's the word that we derive our word deacon from. Some of you here are deacons in our church. And it means to serve in the way of the gospel. It doesn't mean to go flip burgers somewhere or make somebody lunch, although it could mean that. But it means, in essence, symbolically, what Jesus has done is made her whole again so that she could go and serve the gospel. What do we mean by that? So she could go and serve in love and compassion and justice, maybe in a new way that she had not known before. Now, he's done this privately in this house. And again, I want to point out, because this is going to be important later, he's breaking Sabbath law. You're not supposed to be healing people on Sabbath. That's considered work, and you don't work on the Sabbath. He'd already broken that law in the synagogue. He's done it here, although he's done it away from the public eye, so maybe not such a problem. But somehow word has gotten out that he is this great healer, and now Mark tells us all the people, he says the whole town practically, has gathered around Simon's house looking to be healed. And it's now sunset, the Sabbath is over, and they're bringing the sick and the demon-possessed, it says, to Jesus. They're coming literally right up to the door of the house, and Jesus can't ignore this need, right? So he and the disciples go out, and they begin caring for all the people. And we imagine it goes on for hours and hours. I picture it this way. I had to go to urgent care recently here in town. And if you've been into urgent care recently, you know those places are packed right now. And you go in, and there's just people everywhere. And a bunch of us are wearing masks because we don't want to catch the flu, but there are people coughing and sneezing, and there are little babies with their parents crying, and everybody looks miserable, and they're just praying that they'll be the next person called to get to go. Imagine that's what this is like. All these people and their family members are gathered around the house. And I remember how people joke sometimes, I don't like to go to the hospital because it's full of sick people. You've heard that? Well, why are hospitals full of sick people? Because people know that's where they can go to get healed. Well, why have all these people gathered around outside of Simon's house? Because they know that Jesus has both the compassion and the authority to heal them. But at some point we have to imagine as night gets late, they call it quits for the evening and they go into the house. But it seems clear that the people are still there. There's still people, and maybe they just sleep out on the front stoop and the front lawn. They're waiting for Jesus to come back. But Jesus needs time off, and so Mark tells us that in the wee hours in the morning, while it's still dark, when we presume everybody else is still asleep, what does he do? He sneaks off. And I like to imagine, he gets out of bed and he walks very quietly, not to wake anybody else up in the house, and he very quietly opens the front door, and there are people sleeping right there, and he very gingerly steps over them, and he makes his way out to his deserted place. And there he spends time in his deserted place, alone, praying, resting in God, and discerning where God is going to call him next. Do you notice the parallelism that Mark is offering us here? Just as Jesus has lifted up one person, Simon's mother-in-law, to go and serve the gospel, Jesus says, good, now I'm taking a break. Is there something here for us today? Some idea about how we might think that sometimes we're called to serve, and sometimes, and we don't get this message a lot, it's time to take a break. Sometimes it's time to rest. In my profession, we have something called pastor burnout. We have ministers who don't know how to take a break, who are convinced that we're supposed to be on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They never take their day off, and these ministers only last a few years, and then they're off to do something else because they burn out. And that's very true, but I think there's also something that we should term church member burnout. Amen? Church member burnout. Some of you all take on ministries in the church here or at other churches when you've served other churches, and you take on ministries and you're passionate about them, and you get really involved in them, and they become part of who you are and how you identify yourself. And then the time comes that you need a break and you need some rest, but you won't let it go. Maybe because you're afraid that if you let it go, nobody else is going to bother to pick it up. Nobody else is going to have the passion that you do. Nobody else is going to be willing to step in and say, it's my turn. You rest, friend. It's my turn to step in. And some of us don't know how to say no when we're asked to do something. We don't know how to say, I said yes last time. This time, I'm the one that needs the rest, so I'm saying no. And I think some of us just feel guilty when we say no. We feel like we're supposed to be active all the time, supposed to be productive all the time. And I think that sin partly is impressed on us by the culture we live in. Did you know that this statistic still holds that the United States, of all the industrialized nations, we allow our workers the least amount of vacation time of all the other industrialized nations? But here's the real kicker. Even though we are allowed the less amount, at the end of the year, at least half of us won't even have taken all of that vacation time. We're caught up in the sin of productivity. Like, we have to always be working. Most of you, how many of you can take your work home at night? You can take your computer and be doing it all at home. Teachers, I know you do this. You take your work home every night. And so we're taught that we can constantly, that's our value, is in being productive all the time. And I don't think our spiritual ancestors were any better at this. They had to be productive all the time, sometimes because it meant the difference between life and death. But I think this is why they created the notion of the Sabbath. Because they said, we need to take at least one day off a week. We need one day when we, our servants, even our animals, get some time to rest. And we need to take that time off and realize that the world goes on without us. That the sun still comes up, it still goes down, things get done. God still has things moving along without us. It's important to take that time away and to rest. So I don't see Jesus feeling guilty at all in this story that he took time away, because in fact it seems in that time away he discerns, I can't heal everybody. I can't take care of everybody that needs taken care of. What he discerns in this time as my call is to preach the gospel, preach the good news that the kingdom is here, it's ready for you, participate in it. My call is to lift up healers wherever I go, to lift up people of compassion wherever I go, to lift up people of justice wherever I go, to lift up even more people who will push against empire wherever I go. Like he does with Simon's mother-in-law. His call is to lift up all of us to be in service to the kingdom of God. Many Sundays, I start this service by saying, hi, my name is Brian, and I'm one of the ministers of this church. And some of you have said to me, Brian, why do you say that? Aren't you the only minister in this church? Well, first of all, that's not right on one level. We have other ordained ministers in this congregation. We're blessed to have them here with us. But we have a lot more ministers than that in this congregation, because we in the Disciples of Christ believe something called the priesthood of all believers. The priesthood of all believers. That means that all of us who follow the gospel, who follow Jesus, are ministers within the church. And my primary call as an ordained pastor, with all the things that I do and am blessed to do as your pastor at this church, my primary call is to equip the saints of the church for ministry. To equip the saints of the church for ministry. And guess who the saints are? Teresa is one of the saints, but Patrick, you're one of those saints too. All of you are the saints of the church. You are all saints. See, your mothers were correct. You are saints. All of you are ministers within the church. All who choose to follow Christ are called into the ministry of the church in different ways. Turn to somebody right now, if you're willing, and say to them, you're a minister, and let them say it back to you. You're a minister. Did you believe it when they said it to you? It's true. All of us have ministry, but we all are called in different ways. And sometimes your call to ministry is to take a break and to rest and discern. And sometimes your call to ministry is to step up where a vacancy maybe has taken place and be involved. And to each of us, it's different. But to each of us, the reminder comes today, Christianity is not a spectator sport. We're all called to serve. And many of you do it right here in the ministries of the church. You're feeding the hungry, and you're caring for the homeless, and you're taking care of at-risk children, and you're doing things in our community that come out of the ministries of this church. And some of you are doing it in your everyday lives as teachers, as social workers, and as lawyers, and people in the medical professions, and people that work out in the public and working with customers. And you're just in the way that you show compassion and love to other people, you are ministers of the gospel. And I want you to celebrate that today. So here's my challenge for all of us this week. Here's our homework for this week. Sometime this week, go to your deserted place. Whether that's a literal place or it's a spiritual place, it's a mental place, call that friend on the phone, but go to your spiritual place and spend some time in rest and discernment. Ask God to help you figure out, is the ministry I'm doing right now the ministry that I'm really called to right now? Is it time to set something aside so I can start something else? Is it time for me to rest and reflect? And I want to help you with this a little bit because I know some of you will go home and say, well, did you really mean that we should do that this week? Or should I really give myself permission to do that? So I've got a coupon for you. And it says right on here, good for one free trip to your deserted place. Redeemable for permission to get away from it all, take a break, pause the busyness of your life, and center yourself in God's presence. And then there's some suggestions there for what you could be doing while you're in that deserted place. And know that as you go there, God waits for you. Open your hearts to God and see what God would put on your life today. Let's pray together. Creator God, we come here and worship today to rest in you. And we confess we don't do that often enough because we live such busy lives. Help us this week to do this homework. Help us to remember sometime this week to pause and stop, to go to our deserted place and find you there waiting for us. And to open our hearts and our lives to you to hear your call for us this day. And all God's people say, Amen. Our hymn of response today is in that red book you'll find in front of you. It's number 461, Lord, whose love in humble service. I invite you to stand in body or spirit and let us sing together.